Will we see any NHL offer sheets to restricted free agents this offseason? And if so, who are the most likely candidates who could receive and possibly sign one? We'll discuss the possibilities and who I think are the most likely candidates coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we're taking a look at potential offer sheet targets for restricted free agents in the 2022 NHL offseason. Now, of course, we may not see any offer sheets. It's not something that's super common. Of course, the past couple of years, we actually have seen offer sheets, one being successful, but that was also a bit of a Carolina Hurricane, Montreal Canadian kind of tit for tat thing where the Habs signed Sebastian Aho to an offer sheet. The Canes matched to retain the player. And of course, the Carolina Hurricanes went after Jasper Bratt the following season and offered him, in my opinion, way too much money. And the Habs let him go, took the compensation. And here we are. So we have had a couple of signed offer sheets in recent years. We went a long stretch of time prior to that without seeing any. Doesn't mean that the offer sheets for a long stretch there were not offered. They just were not signed. A lot of times offer sheets don't even become publicly known if the player does not decide to sign and accept. So of course, in case you're not aware how this works, restricted free agents cannot necessarily just sign and leave to go to another NHL franchise. The NHL team that holds his rights, as long as he receives a qualifying offer, then he will be able to sign an offer sheet, but the NHL team that holds his rights will have the first right to match. They have 7 days to make a decision, and there is a list of compensation that's predetermined by the NHL if they do decide to pass up and take the compensation, what that is going to be. So obviously, if from year to year, there's lots of rumors about offer sheets, but like I said, they're not that common. As we get into times here where the salary cap is that much tighter and tighter every year because of a lack of an increase and because of obviously players continue to get more salary, more money, and they don't have a lot more room on the salary cap. So that's kind of creating more teams really tight up against cap situations, which sometimes can be a big driver here as well. It's not always that teams don't want to pay their players. It's not always that the player doesn't want to stay. It's generally quite often a case of they just can't afford to keep them, essentially. That's quite often a big piece of the puzzle here. So we'll see how things go. This is also typically more common as well for RFAs that are a little bit younger into their seniority with the NHL and do not have arbitration rights. Usually teams and players know that if they can't come to a deal, that one or the other can file for salary arbitration, and it can be predetermined by them after going through a hearing. It's kind of like almost like a court session, if you will. Both sides argue their points, and a third party determines what the reward is. Typically, they're short-term deals, and sometimes the player in the relationship with the team sometimes does not exactly hold up long-term because of all the negotiations and things that had to be said to get their way in the proceedings. But here we are. So the top 10 candidates, in my opinion, these are in no particular order of players I think that are most likely to receive and possibly sign an offer sheet. I do think most of these cases, it will be the team's preference to trade the player before it ever comes to that, but we'll see how things go. Number 1 is Kevin Fiala with the Minnesota Wild. We know that he had a contentious negotiation process last year with GM Bill Guerin, and they settled on a 1-year deal. They are very tight up against the cap because of the Parise and Suter buyouts that are kicking in hardcore this coming year, and they are pretty much in a spot where they don't really have a lot of choice but to trade at least a player or two off the roster to cut some salary. And given Fiala, given his new contract that he needs and sizable raise that he's going to qualify for, makes him a prime candidate. Plus, you throw in those negotiations from the past, it just makes a lot of sense. Most people feel that he won't be in Minnesota next year, and depending on how quickly they come to a trade package, it could get to that. Now, I only think a Kevin Fiala offer sheet will come along if they don't get a trade done at the draft. Because obviously before a player in RFA status can sign an offer sheet, we have to make it into the free agency period, which doesn't start until July 13th. Of course, the draft is like a week or so before that. They have times to get trades done if on players who they don't feel they're necessarily going to sign. I don't think this one is super likely because I think a trade will take place so that they can get themselves another high first round pick. possibly in this coming draft. So to me, I think he's going to be a target if he's not traded and you get into the free agent period and they're kind of in limbo. I can see a team swooping in here and offering Fiala an obscene amount of money for a 1-year deal like we saw with Kotkaniemi, just to get him away from the Wild. Now, of course, number 2, I have Nicholas Hagg, the 23-year-old defenseman from the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, we know Vegas is in a pretty tough cap situation here as well. Nicholas Hagg may not be the big sexy name that a lot of people expected to be on this list, but he is a pretty solid top 4 defenseman. He's played a lot of minutes, spent a lot of time injured recently as well, but Vegas has some tough decisions to make. They have no choice either but to try to shed some salary. Now, of course, they picked up the contract for Shea Weber. Of course, that's going to expand their LTIR pool, so they're not going to have to lose as much money as they would have previously. They did lose Evgeny Dadonov in that trade as well, so the cap situation for Vegas has certainly changed, but they're still going to, depending on what other moves they want to make, they still might have to lose a little bit of money, and it can see things kind of dragging on here possibly to get a Hagg contract done. And if that goes into the free agent period, I could see a team swooping in, because this is not one that would be a super high-paying contract, so the compensation wouldn't be as crazy, and I can see a team making that kind of move. Number 3, I've got Jesse Puljujarvi of the Edmonton Oilers. Puljujarvi, to me, is a candidate in Edmonton that very well has a high likelihood of being in a new uniform next year. The Oilers, like most teams, have their cap troubles and probably can't keep all of the players that need new deals. You have other guys like Yamamoto, for example, who I think would be prioritized over Puljujarvi. Same with Ryan McLeod, and Jesse Puljujarvi could be a trade target for the Oilers to try to bring in something else that might help them in another part of the team and maybe save them a little bit of money at the same time. So again, like Fiala, like these other guys, I think the Oilers are probably going to be exploring a trade and probably move one of their RFAs before or around the draft time. So I do think, again, an offer sheet is probably less likely, but if things don't materialize and they drag on, I can see Puljujarvi being a prime target, because I don't think they can really, he can't justify getting too much money, so it wouldn't be an obscene amount. Number 4, we got Rasmus Sandin of the Toronto Maple Leafs. As we've talked about before, the Maple Leafs have a crowded blue line now, and they are expected to maybe move with 1, maybe 2 veteran guys to free up some money to help with their cap and to create more playing time and more room for young defensemen like Sandin and Liljegren. Now, the reason I put Sandin on this list and not Liljegren, they're both due for contracts. They're probably going to get very similar deals. Probably not $2.5 million range on a couple-year term would be the likely outcome for the Leafs. But again, I think this is a scenario where they don't have arbitration rights, so it could drag on for a while. So it could get into that free agent period where they're eligible to sign one. And number 2, they're going to have to move guys like Justin Hall, possibly Jake Muzzin, and that could get complicated. It could take some time. If they get their deals done in pretty good timing here and they get it done ahead of free agency, they can get the player signed and avoid any potential targeting that way. But Sandin, for example, if they don't trade a guy like Muzzin, they already signed Mark Giordano. And of course, they have Morgan Riley as their top left shot D. That's 3 experienced left shot defensemen playing ahead of them in the lineup. I don't know if they could play Sandin on his offside, but even then, you get him and Liljegren there, both that can play right side. Liljegren naturally on the right side. And of course, you get TJ Brody, who's a left-handed shot, but normally plays his offside as well. I don't know if Ilya Lyubushkin is coming back. So again, it's a bit of a crowded blue line, right? So depending on how long it takes the Leafs to get their business taken care of, if we get to that free agent period and Sandin is not signed and they don't have other deals made, I can see a team swooping in here and putting the pressure on the Maple Leafs to scramble to keep their player. Number 5 and 6 are 2 Calgary Flames, and we'll talk about them together, and that's Andrew Mangiapane and Matthew Kachuk. Now, I think Matthew Kachuk would probably prefer to sign long-term. Mangiapane, I wouldn't be shocked if he wants to do another 1-year deal and get himself right to being a UFA next year. At least that's the words from his agent earlier this offseason and into the regular season as well. Kind of said what he would recommend. Ultimately, we don't know if Mangiapane will accept that. But at this point, he's a player who's not regularly in the top 6. He's not regularly on the power play, but he's scoring 30-plus goals, and he's going to create quite a market for himself. So there'll be other teams that would love to have this guy and get him in a solid top 6 setting. But of course, another big part of this that we don't know is the future of top-line player and the biggest point producer on the team, Johnny Gaudreau, we don't know what holds the future for him. He's a pending UFA. Will he re-sign? At this point, it's looking like Gaudreau's going to take that to free agency and see what else is out there before he makes his decision. That's going to put the pressure on Calgary to probably hold off getting these other deals done until they know what's going on with Johnny. At least I would think that they would want to get Johnny done first if they could to give him a better outlook of their cap situation. That's going to create a havoc here with these two RFA players who can certainly wait. Kachuk could go to arbitration, on the other hand, and get himself a one-year deal and end up in a situation where he becomes a UFA next year and could walk and puts the pressure on the team as well. So it's a situation in Calgary. It's a really important offseason. After a real solid year, lots of progress, they're in a situation where the pressure is on big time to keep this team together, and it's not going to be easy to do. If Kachuk gets his long-term deal, that probably means that Gaudreau stayed and get his long-term deal, and that could push Mangiapane out the door because they just can't afford to get it done, which I would think that would lead to a trade of Mangiapane probably around the time of the draft, which would make a lot of sense. But at the draft, if they don't know yet about Gaudreau, it's hard to make these decisions. And if we get into the July 13th free agent period and they're all kind of in limbo, I could see a team coming in, swooping in to get Mangiapane. And they don't know if they can match or not. Thankfully, they have 7 days. It just creates a real awkward scenario there for the Flames, which could be difficult to navigate through. And we'll see what things hold. Kachuk, I would think, be less likely than Mangiapane, given the fact that he can has a little bit more negotiating power, where he's been there a little longer and has a little bit more negotiating power, I think, based on his performance being a little bit more important to the team than his teammate. But again, like I said, Mangiapane is one of those under the radar kind of guys that, he could be a big part of the team. But if Gaudreau leaves, I'm sure that they're going to really push that much harder to get him signed and stay. But we'll see. At number 7, I've got PierreLuc Dubois in Winnipeg. Of course, lots of rumors about the Jets. We don't know what the future holds for a lot of their roster, but lots of talk that Dubois may or may not be willing to sign long-term, which is probably the Jets' preference. They, obviously made a big trade to get him. I'm sure they want to keep him long-term, but if he doesn't want to sign long-term, that could get to a point where the negotiations really drag on. And if it drags on into free agency, I could see a scenario where he would have a lot of interest around the league, that a team could come in and make a ridiculous offer, and like we saw with Kotkaniemi, and get it done. Now, I don't expect that to happen in this case, but again, it's one of those scenarios where I just think it's possible, not overly likely. At number 8, I've got Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars, a guy coming out of his ELC, putting up 40 goals, turning into a big star with the Dallas organization. They also have Jake Ottinger, the star goaltender, to take care of. I have no doubt that they have the capability to get these deals done, but again, where they don't have arb rights, they could drag on into the summer, and if they drag on into free agency, it's going to kind of hamper the GM here, Jim Nill, being able to do a lot without knowing the official price tag for these guys, and it could create a scenario where another team might be able to take advantage of that. Now, I don't think either necessarily have a desire to leave. I think they see an opportunity to be a big part of the team's future, and I'm sure that the team sees that too, but it's just a scenario where when they're, like I said, when they're younger, they don't have those arb rights. The negotiations can drag on right up till training camp sometimes, and I can see a team swooping in there and making a push if they can. But again, I'm not sure that's overly likely, but he's an interesting player that most teams would love to have, so I can see there being at least some teams thinking about it. Number 9, I've got Jasper Bratt in New Jersey. Reports are that his previous contract was a bit of a contentious negotiation. That's why his name's been coming up in trade rumors lately. Not so much that the Devils really want to part with the player. It's just that based on how things went before, there seems to be some that are thinking that it could be a very difficult negotiation yet again. And if negotiations break down and are not trending in the way that Bratt wants, then it very well could be a scenario where either he is moved or becomes an offer sheet target. Again, I think the Devils really like this player. I think we've seen him evolve over the last number of years. Devils fans will tell you they've seen the production that he put up this past year coming. There's no fluke, no real shocker that he's kind of evolved into this kind of player. And at this point, it's going to become difficult to get signed, though, is the only thing. When you get that kind of production and you have a history of having contentious negotiations, it does make you wonder how things will go. If they drag on too long, I could see another team coming in, but I would think that more than likely it would lead to a trade before an offer sheet could be presented. But we'll see. Things can be complicated sometimes. And number 10, lastly, but certainly not least, like I said, these are in no particular order anyway. But I do think a scenario could exist where Kaapo Kakko of the New York Rangers be a potential offer sheet target as well. The New York Rangers, like most teams, like I said, are going to have a tough situation this summer. They have a lot of decisions to be made. A lot of people wonder how Kakko feels given his Game 6 scratch in the third round of the playoffs by head coach Gerard Gallant. And, would he be open to such an idea if another team came along, showed that they valued him higher and gave him a lot more money than the Rangers were willing to pay? It would have to be a big overpay, of course, just like the Kotkaniemi situation. But to get him on a one-year deal at a couple $1 million more than what the Rangers might offer might give him something to think about, especially given how his season ended. Not to say that he really wants to leave Big Apple or that the Big Apple or that the New York Rangers are anxious to part with him. I don't think that's the case at all, and I do see his role evolving and getting bigger with the team next year, with the most likely scenario that he gets signed and stays with the Rangers. But I can see him being of interest to other teams and being a target if his status remains unchanged and he remains an unsigned player as we get into the free agent market. So those are my top 10 players. Let me know in the comments if you think there are other players that are, just as much or more likely to be an offer sheet target. As again, this is a reminder, a disclaimer. I'm not necessarily saying we're going to see offer sheets, but I think these are the players that teams, in my opinion, would probably think the most about. There are other players out there that are really good, needing deals that are RFAs. I just see between the team's cap situation and everything that it's a lot, more likely that the team would match and it would be less intriguing for teams to go after. I think these are targets that teams would look at and actually think, I have a chance to get this done. It's not just a case of, I like that player, I wonder if he'd come to our team. It's a case of, I like this player, their cap situation is tight, I really think we have a chance here if we're willing to do this or that, and that's why I picked these players the way they are. But again, we could see some of these players moved. They may not get to that, and teams are going to do what they can to protect themselves. No guarantee we see any offer sheets at all this offseason, but if so, I think one of these guys might be the guy. So let me know your thoughts on these players down in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.